is growing. So there's no question that we have a market out there, and I really want to let people know that we don't need to be afraid to plant this year. There are a number of market segments that we can capitalize on. There are growing biomass markets. There's this massive smokable flower market that's developing, both in Europe and in the States. If you have a compliant product, you can capitalize on that European market. So there's just really no need to worry about planting the way that we have. And I would really end on in that bit of the conversation on, recently I had a Uruguayan group that we work with, send me an article out of Forbes that we just imported. This is about 2 months ago, maybe a month and a half ago, that we just imported $2.5 million US worth of hemp from smokable flower at $200 a kilogram from Uruguay into the US. So if anybody's questioning, that we don't have product, or whether or not we have product that's gonna fill the shelves, there's your answer right there. And of course, the Uruguayan Minister of Ag was bragging that up. It was a great kick to their economy. And I just thought, here we are struggling with this nascent industry, trying to figure this out. It would have been a lot better if we would have had that domestically, although don't get me wrong, I'm very much for the global market. I love the frontier markets. And, I think just we have a lot of US farmers on here, and I want to make sure that we're in a time when we understand the industry and that we don't need to be worried so much about that. And that would lead me to craft cannabis, or craft flower, craft hemp flower. So we're seeing a big movement of craft hemp flower across the nation. I see a lot of guys now starting to, shrink down a little bit the size of their production so they can focus a little bit more on quality. And then, they're growing in greenhouse. We're seeing indoor flower. There are some great examples out there, like Ohio Fire Factory is one. Beleafer Blooms is another one you can look at. These guys are putting out CBD flower, non-intoxicating flower that looks as good as any, type 1 high THC flower you'll see on the market. So I want you guys to know there's a great opportunity there if you have some skill and, our experience with this plant to lean in a little bit. We're not here pushing 100 acres out to everybody, but hey, if you have a greenhouse or a half an acre and you have some skill, this is a good time to get in. I think you'll see some good numbers. Don't quote me. You guys can do the research yourself, but we're seeing $300 and $400 a pound prices on decent flower. These are non-280E sales, so you just have a great opportunity to make some money for your family and your company. So just want you to know about that. And on that note, I want to let everybody know that we are proud to be sponsoring and have our genetics entered into the first national grow-offs. The grow-off has been a competition for craft flower, for high THC flower. Because of restriction of interstate commerce, it hasn't been allowed to kind of flourish everywhere. It's been 8 states, but for the first time, Samantha Taylor, who's puts this event on, is for the first year, they're going to go ahead and do a 50-state grow-off, and they're using one of our CBD flowers. So I bring that up because if you're interested in growing, and Orange Photonics is a big part of that too. So you'll see as the season goes on, but they're doing all the testing for it. But if you guys are already thinking about craft flower, consider getting the clone and growing that out for the season, because I think you're going to get some great press on it, and it would be a good push for anybody who's already interested in craft flower.
Gotta double down on that one, Jeremy. It's going to be such a big deal. Really going to bring some attention to the craft market and get people to come to the table with the best of the best of, the smokable flower that this country has to offer. So if you've got it, it's time to grow some Davis Farms herb this year.
Oh, and the selection is going to be incredible. It's a clone only. It's an elite clone selection. It's going to be a high CBC, but super high resin content, really greasy, beautiful flower. So we're looking forward to releasing it. It's an unreleased flower up to now. And so it'd be, something that we're going to send out to each farm that enters this grow off and give them an opportunity to grow this thing out across the nation and see what comes out of it. But yeah, it should be a lot of fun. It's a across the season program. So it starts in April and ends in November with a ceremony that's been happening in Las Vegas. So it's a fun event. But yeah, certainly a way to market your farm if you're going to go craft flower this year. And I guess, I'll lead right into lab shopping is where I'll head now. I'm not going to really I was going to touch a little on isomerized and converted cannabinoids, but I think I'll stay off of that topic. If Jill wants to get into it a little later, she actually has a much broader understanding of it, perfect, than I do. So she'll be great to talk about that. And it is a controversial subject. I mean, the bottom line for me is I want to see this industry survive. And so in seeing these farmers find their workarounds and ways to keep the money rolling in, I've been supportive of it. I just, at the end of the day, we just hope that it's not disruptive to the non-intoxicating CBD movement, which is, that's a lot of what's been the power behind the CBD movement, which is, drug a lot of the stigma out of, I think, the entire cannabis space, is that, hey, how can you negatively stigmatize something that's not intoxicating? And so it's a sensitive thing, and I'll just leave it there. But I'm proud of people for figuring a workaround. I don't have an opinion strongly one way or another on what the DEA just did, coming down and changing things. But certainly it's been an interesting ride, this DEA ride to watch. And I think a lot of people probably saved their farms with it. But I think that being said, we all know it's time to think about another pathway, look at diversifying into another direction, and so I'll leave it at that. And now really the reason that I brought us here today, as we put this together, we've been leading up to this sort of with our email marketing campaign. Anybody who's getting on our email list has gotten a couple of emails from us talking about the lab shopping and holding these labs accountable, because when we start to see this conversation come up about, all this potency inflation and people trying to drive for higher potency in lab shopping so that they can get a higher THC number, these guys are looking for 1% and 2% and 3% higher total THC content numbers when we're trying to keep things below a 1% line. We're really looking at these tenths of a percentile the other direction. And so it hasn't really been talked about with us using the same laboratories, the same testing equipment, and being caught in this debacle in a completely different way. And we're the leaders in compliance here in the States. We have the globally compliant genetics. We have the genetics that are full maturity and actually test 0.3. And there are very few that can achieve that. But as we start to see this laboratory shopping come out, it really makes me call into question how many of my fellow breeders have been really close to being on the mark or on the mark and haven't been able to achieve that. And that's been the responsibility of lab testing. I will say that early on, before, and this is one of the neat things about this piece of equipment we're about to talk about and delve into some of the nuances of testing, but before.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jeremy, all of that is really what got us talking about having this webinar, was yes. that was really itching at both of us, was that how was this really affecting where it all started with the hemp farmers across the United States? Because that's where we started too. So keep going,
right.
But yeah.
No, you're right. And it just hadn't been talked about enough. I know it's a hot button. So I'm glad that we're here talking about it today, because I think a lot of hemp farmers and a lot of hemp breeders have been caught out by it. And I was just going to give you this example of, before we had any kind of portable HPLC testing capabilities, right? We were dependent entirely. When we were doing this breeding program early on, we were completely dependent on these labs as gatekeepers, and not only was it cost prohibitive, but just on a single test, but we started learning really quickly, we're up against national, federal standards, and in a lot of cases, international requirements. And so we can't fudge this. We can't have something that looks good for us. We can't cherry pick a lab, essentially, right? We can't cherry pick a COA, because these are going to be tested everywhere. And so what we realized is that we actually got to where we started sending first 3 homogenized samples. So we would take a sample, we would break it, homogenize it, and then put it into 3 separate sample packages, deliver it to the lab as 3 independent test products to test, and then check the variability for ourselves, and then take that and find the median from that to figure out where we actually were. Well, the scary thing is that went from 3 to 4 to 6 to 8. 8 is where we finally landed on the number that we could actually trust. Okay, we do that over and over again to understand repeatability for ourselves, right? And reproducibility for ourselves. And it just seemed to me really sad and a little bit crazy that we had to do that. So,
and now you got it all flipped around, where you got the same sample getting resent to different laboratories for the best of the best in some cases, and the implications again of that, and the way that the labs have to respond to both directions.
Yes.
It's serious stuff. So that's crazy. 8 samples, and it's stuff that, I'm going to share a little bit of data around kind of that conversation, but that's something that we, as a company, we've had our own kind of interlab studies prove out as well, is that, you send that same split sample to the same lab or different labs called different things, and you're going to get a whole lot of different answers. Definitely.
You do. And so there's the factor of how much of that is the inability for the lab to appropriately quantify what we're sending them, to actually quantify the sample, the variability of the machines, like honest, lack of capability. And then you add into that.
It's not always nefarious. It isn't.
Like
there's so much of it. Like, if this is the problem, like most of it is just honest, mistaken instrument stuff, like that's published in the instrumentation error from the manufacturers themselves, that's just carried through to the laboratory faults. So big time. But then you got that slice, right? I know you're going to hit on that slice. That nefarious. That nefarious.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, and that's it. I don't really need to hit on it. I think you touched on it by just bringing up the fact that this is not all people trying to, make a buck the wrong way. So, and really, it's profound. What I've seen that you brought, I caught about a 5-minute, sample of this PowerPoint that she's about to release onto everybody. And some of the stuff that she has is profound. It really shows where the labs struggle. And I'm just going to give a little bit of the info away. It shows that the labs struggle down below 1% a lot. So I look forward to you going through that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce one of the most brilliant people in cannabis that we've already been talking to. And certainly a bright star that we all need in this space, Jill Carreiro, who is the VP at Orange Photonics, VP of Sales at Orange Photonics. And like I said, just an absolutely wonderful human being, and somebody that has taught me a lot about analytics, a lot about how to be a better breeder, a lot about how to bring better products to the marketplace in a more precise and efficient manner. So please, Jill, if you can take the control and
pleasure has been mine. Yeah, definitely. The pleasure has been mine, my friend. You've taught me just as much. And it's that relationship between science and legacy understanding. We talk about it a lot here at Orange Photonics, right? We add a layer of data to what is this amazing tribal wizardry that has been within cannabis forever, this understanding of what to do with our plants and what to do with our processes. But how can we be better about it when we just, add a layer of data on top? That's kind of what we stand for. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you and talk with your folks and get a little nerdy, maybe a little too nerdy sometimes, and I apologize. I'm going to start with kind of talking about C of A's, because that's definitely where, that's where the communication happens, right? That's the how we communicate with the laboratories, whether it's that we're adult use folks or we're, hemp compliance, minded. It's all on that piece of paper. And oftentimes we get asked about it too, like, okay, what does LightLab suffice? What is it? What can it do that's on that C of A? All right, it fulfills that C of A, not everything on that C of A. So I'm going to share my screen here if you don't mind. And I'm going to talk with you a little bit about kind of what happens when you do send a sample out, right, to the laboratory. It gets split up to a whole bunch of different technologies to get the answers that would go on to a certificate of analysis. And, that includes chromatography, that includes ICP-MS. That includes maybe PCR analysis. So I want to talk with you too about kind of what each of those are, because I know there's a lot of confusion about what these technologies are, and I can add maybe a little bit of clarity to that, because that's nerdism. So welcome to Jill's world, and thank you for again coming. When it gets down to it, sorry guys, I'm trying to click over to the next slide here and having some troubles. Give me, folks.
Doesn't help that the entire country's under like crazy storms, right?
Yeah, and I don't know what's happening here. I'm trying to get some response out of my Zoom here. But when you're talking about sending these different samples to different laboratories, sorry guys, I don't know what's happening here, but I'm not able to get any connection. I don't know what's happening. So I'm going to try here to get some action. Put these slides forward though, for some reason. I've got a complete blue screen of death computer, as we all know. Can you still hear me, folks? Now samples to a laboratory, right? They're going to split.
Yeah, we can still hear you. I can definitely.
All right,
still
here
hear
we go. We're alive. It's going to click through like a bunch of slides though, like that button a bunch, right? Here we go. Now my computer came back to life. So here we go. Let's see if we can do that all again. Sorry about that, folks, and thanks for sticking with us. And I hope it doesn't misbehave the same way again. So hopefully you can see this, folks. So when we're talking about looking at mycotoxins and pesticides, for example, those are always going to go to an LC-MS-MS, and that's a crazy, crazy beast of an instrument. And so your portion of your panel that has your pesticides analysis, you're going to get action levels, and that action level really corresponds to the allowable amount in 1 kilogram that's okay for a human to consume. And those are tiny, tiny amounts. And then you'll see something called the limit of quantification. And that's really how much that machine, that big beast of a machine, can quantify. And then you'll see the result, and that's how much was detected. What you really want to see is passes or non-detectants, right? And that's really important. When you're talking about what this machine is, you can kind of think of it as a super, super fancy scale of sorts, right? When you send molecules into it, it blasts them apart using some sort of ion source, and then is able to measure every single atom in there. And depending on how many mass specs you got added up, so that's why it says MS, you can use those mass spec detectors to figure out the shapes and structures that you have in there. So it is absolutely awesome at giving you quantification and structure of molecules, right? Unfortunately, it costs like $500,000. So great technology. Definitely is what's used most of the time for your pesticides. Then when you look at that portion of your C of A that's talking about like microbials, usually nowadays that's done by PCR. It could be done by ELISA. It could be done by culture chemistry, right? Like petri dishes, like you see here, and growing weird stuff in petri dishes. But most of the time it's done with PCR, which is really like kind of like a photocopy machine is what I think about in my head. It looks at the piece of DNA that you're interested in. So the machine says, I want to look for all these weird microbials. And then the PCR goes photocopy, photocopy, photocopy until you have enough to measure. And again, you have LOD and LOQ. And the difference really between those, right, is how much you can detect, what the machine can detect versus what the machine can quantify. And the quantify number will always be higher, right? Because you've got to have some confidence around that. Again, you want to see all passes on this. Sometimes you'll see tested instead of non-detected or pass. And that usually means that those aren't locally regulated where you live. So that can be pretty interesting. We like to see things get tested by labs that aren't regulated. Actually, that means you're ahead of the pack. Then heavy metals, right? Heavy metals is definitely important if you're growing outdoors, especially. That is usually measured by something called ICP-MS. So ICP-MS uses plasma. Plasma is cool because it's basically like turning gas into a liquid that can conduct electricity. Super cool. Again, super expensive and really hard to use, but very important because they're an elemental technique, not a molecular technique. So what that means is like they can do metals where none of these other techniques could ever detect metals. An old school way to do it is through atomic absorption spectroscopy, but to be able to use that for cannabis and for the things that we see around cannabis, it's a super expensive, crazy system. So it's just easier to use ICP-MS. Again, we're looking for passes and non-detecteds around those numbers, always on your heavy metals testing. And then you have residual solvents. This is exceptionally important in the world of extraction. And, you know, I like to always, again, with pesticides, residual solvents, you can go state to state and you have crazy differences in what you're expected to do. I live in Massachusetts. It is tight. Go to Colorado. It's a lot easier to do a whole bunch of things. That said, as a consumer, everybody should always be looking at this. If you're a dabber or a vapor, you should definitely be looking at your residual solvents on your certificate of analysis. It's important to always see passes and non-detects. It's important to understand, you know, this technology, GCMS with Headspace, it's my favorite technology besides chromatography with liquid chromatography. Just because it's so important to be able to measure volatile things, like things that go up into the air, gases, right? Things that hit your face, like solvents and terpenes. You need GCMS, and usually Headspace analysis is the best way to do it. Again, not the easiest things to use. You can figure them out, but they are not cheap to buy as well. But super awesome pieces of instrumentation. And that's where you get your residual solvent piece of your certificate of analysis. And then chromatography, the god of all analytics, at least in my world. And it's really important for cannabis and the industry general. It's where, you know, the bulk of what we care about comes from. When you're talking about potency analysis, it's coming from chromatography. Usually it's liquid chromatography for cannabinoids and gas chromatography for terpenes. And there's differences in why those are used. We could talk about this crazy word called derivatization. But when you're looking at a certificate of analysis around cannabinoids and terpenes, you don't see passes and fails, right? Because it's not about that. It's not, here's the number that's set. You see levels. And those levels are usually displayed in percentages if you're talking about plants or concentrates. And then if you get into the world of edibles and formulations, you can see milligrams per gram or milligrams per unit or liter, milliliter in different kind of formats of your reporting. Again, it's really important just to understand, you know, what your instrument is capable of seeing, limit of detection. That's like the bottom that thing can possibly see. And then limit of quantification, that's taking in matrix. That takes in like the real world, what amount can be accurately quantified in this sample of that thing. And that's really important, that LOQ. So chromatography, it's where it's at. And you see there, I included a couple of pictures of chromatography. Liquid chromatography can be a big, huge stack of instruments. And that's my background, actually. Or it can be something like this. And the amazing folks on my team figured out how to simplify chromatography into the tool we make. It's called LightLab. Yeah, there are definitely other ways to measure potency besides liquid chromatography. Gas chromatography is one, right? If you got a GC, cool. You can do a lot with a GC, actually. Again, it's my second favorite technology. Spectroscopy alone, it has some capabilities, but they are quite limited. Thin layer chromatography, that's like white plates, as some of you might know. That has its capabilities too. And then we have NMR, but each one of these has its limitations. And they're pretty big limitations when it comes to like real world chromatography potency analysis. GC, the big one is that you have to do that thing that I called before, chemical alteration, derivatization. You've got to do something to the sample to be able to see all the cannabinoids first, And that starts to mess with all sorts of accuracy and your ability to measure total THC. You need a chemist. You need a chemist. Spectroscopy is another method that gets used a lot. There are a couple of other little boxes out there that people want to throw around. And they're okay, you know, if you want a fast but kind of unreliable guesstimate on what those numbers might be on a couple of cannabinoids, they can do the job. The big thing is they are a secondary method. And no matter what, they use HPLC data like LightLab as the primary source of data to do all their calibration. So it's pretty important to think about that, like, and where that data comes from. It's a secondary method, not a primary method. And that's not the kind of type of method that's used in a laboratory. TLC is cool just because it's historic and legendary, super low sensitivity. But if you need to know like presence of different cannabinoids and things, that's cool. NMR, awesome. But again, you have to be a wizard to be able to do it. And you have to have super access. Like there are a few NMRs here and there, that kind of thing. So it's not really an everyman's tool. So HPLC is definitely the gold standard for cannabinoid potency testing. It's liquid chromatography, high performance, right? HPLC is what that stands for. The real deal here is that it's the go-to because it's specific, right? See all these crazy spiky peaks? That's very different from what you see in spectroscopy, where it's kind of like waves. Every cannabinoid is a peak. Every cannabinoid has a place on that elution time. So it's really, really good. It's stable when you do analysis with cannabinoids. You're not having to do some crazy derivatization, and you're not having to keep things stable for a long time. Like it's a pretty easy method to use for cannabinoid analysis. We made an HPLC that is smart and simplified. You see here on the right, like these are common. This is how cannabinoids fall on HPLC, on LightLab HPLC, and you see a lot of overlap. And that's because we use some pretty crazy algorithms within the box to be able to separate those. And I'm going to get into a little bit of detail on that. But when you're thinking about what like chromatography is, I gave you a couple of analogies before. Chromatography is all about like separation science. And I tell people, remember when you're in high school and you have to get to the other end of the hall before the bell rings and the hall is packed full of people. If you have to get to the other end of the hall in like 8 minutes before that bell rings and you're super cool, it takes you forever to get down to that hall. You are THCA. It takes you forever to get through that column. That's that white thing there. If you're like a goofy nerd type like me, you will go straight down that hallway, get right to your classroom. You are CBGA. You shoot right through. And that's kind of the point of what the column does. It separates out, it gives every single cannabinoid a place in line, and that's super controlled. And then each one goes to spectroscopy portion of what's happening on LightLab. And that's really special because we're using a couple of solid state detectors. That's very different. And then we're using a ton of like super crazy science, nonlinear regression analytics, right? So we use all this chromatography and all this spectroscopy, and then we measure the temperature of the air, and we know ages of columns and crazy stuff that no HPLC in the laboratory ever measures. We put it all together to give you the right answer all the time. And I'm going to show you why this matters later on, do a little braggadocio with the data, but this really matters. But it's an HPLC. It's an HPLC. We just made it super simple and robust and made it so that you can beat the crap out of it, really. When you look over at that little chromatography chart there on the right, that's the difference between hemp and adult use cannabis. The blue line is hemp and the red line is adult use cannabis. It's clear as day on chromatography. You have this huge CBGA peak. You have this huge THCA peak. One is present in one is present in the other. That's chromatography and the power. But when you measure those and start quantifying those, that's when you can start learning. This is LightLab. LightLab's sitting here behind me. That's what it looks like when you crack her open. It's a 13-pound orange storm case with all that HPLC science inside of it. It's got a screen that shows you the data on it like that. So You see all the data on the screen as you're using it. You could be out in the field. It also provides full C of A. So that same thing that we were just talking about. Again, this is just the C of A for the potency analysis. So you're not going to get your microbes and you're not going to get all that other stuff. That's not what it's made for. This is the tool to get that business part of the job done that you need to do all the time. We'll talk more about it. It's all about the 20 cannabinoids that it can measure and the answers that might give you in 8 minutes, right? So plants, concentrates, edibles, it tests everything. It's super reliable. It's super rugged, very accurate. We're going to talk about that. But the key here is that anybody can do it. You crack this thing open and you just read through the screens. Little kids run it, and folks that walk up to it at, trade shows, they're running their own samples, just walking through it. It's awesome to see. But that's really what we're all about, right? We're trying to democratize this science for the entire world. That's what we've been about for a long time. That's why we have 1,000 users across the United States in the field using it for this type of work, so that they can kind of flip the script of the laboratory. It's got all like the built-in SOPs, right? Again, so if you want to test a hemp compliance test or an edible or concentrate, you just follow along the screen and it tells you how to prep the sample so that you get to the right answer. It's used in all sorts of places too. So you definitely want to consider, reaching out to us if you want some references on cultivation or extraction or for hemp folks that have been growing for years in the field and using it. But we're also now the trusted solution of U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the DEA and Homeland Security and multiple cannabis control commissions across the United States. They use LightLab. Why? Because it's easy. It gives the same answer every time. We call ourselves the agnostic truth. Sometimes it stinks that folks with badges use LightLab, right? Like, I get it. Big picture, I get it. But big picture, we want everybody to have the right answer, the truth, to be able to move forward with whatever they're doing. And so that's what LightLab really stands for. When it comes to like what you use it for, it's all about like the power of internal data, like $4 a test instead of sending stuff out to a laboratory and waiting, however, it might be 5 days, it might be 2 weeks, it might be 5 weeks, or if you're in a crappy place, a crappy time. But the ability to send your samples either when they're ready to be harvested or about ready to be harvested, or if you need to understand like what's going on in a very large grow, whether that's an outdoor grow, indoor grow, greenhouse, like the impact of positional sampling on what you're sending to the laboratory, both in your grow and on the plant, like don't even get me started, 25%. And if you think the tip is the hottest, you are so wrong. Ask me for more data on that one. But it's really about making sure that you have consistent and beneficial representation for the lab. You can look at it whatever way you want when I say that. But really, it's about having an understanding of what's going to the lab before the lab tells you what's sent to them. Stopping the gatekeeping that Jeremy mentioned. And first and foremost, never, ever, ever going out of compliance. Like this is super important. It's where we started as a company 6-7 years ago almost now, was providing solutions to hemp farmers all across the United States that were desperate for a solution to be able to drive business, grow, and not be like held always hostage by laboratories when they had to stay compliant. So our ability to test way, way below that 0.3 number, we can test down to 0.03 on LightLab 3. Our LightLab 3 high sensitivity gets even 100 times better than that. It's awesome. But like the tool, the go-to tool that we're never getting rid of for our customers out in the field growing plants all the time, LightLab 3, it can test 10 times below the THC limit. So you are good to go. And I want to show you too how like the accuracy and the numbers, you're never going to be wrong around. So you're going to be very confident. And you're also on the flip side of that, and this is what we do a lot of in educating, like how you should actually be using the box to maximize harvest, right? Like you're growing for kilograms of cannabinoids first and foremost, not pounds of plant. Kilograms of cannabinoids, not pounds of plant. So the ability to measure CBGA conversion to your cannabinoids of interest, whether that is just CBDA, maybe it's CBC, maybe it's CBDVA, all of them. You are going to monitor them just as much as you're monitoring your THCA so that you're finding that sweet spot. And maybe that sweet spot is different for different acres. It is, trust me. But the ability to measure it on $4, like, you should be doing it. And then lastly, like, if you are a breeder, like our friend here, the amazing Jeremy Klettke, I mean, this team does, they have set the standard in the nation for a forward-thinking, terpene-rich, medicinal cannabinoids or cannabinoid-heavy hemp. And really, I hate that word hemp. This is cannabis, right? This is cannabis that doesn't have a whole lot of THC and never will, but it's got so many other things, 70, 120 measurable molecules that mean so much. We don't even know what they mean to us yet. But the ability to measure them, like, you got to start measuring. Yeah, we can only measure 20 of them. Give us time. But the ability to measure those 20 as you're going, you better believe you're going to do a whole lot more with your pheno hunt. Like, in week 3 of vegetation, never mind waiting to things bud out and understand what you've done. Like, you're going to start crop steering like when you've just got leaves to work, because LightLab absolutely will give you information. No, it's not going to tell you that, yeah, I've got 12% CBDA in that plant. No, that's not, it's going to tell you ratios. You're going to look at across a whole bunch of little tiny baby plants and understand where your unicorns and your rock stars are. You're going to understand where you're going to put your energy. You understand how to steer things from that point forward, not just based on agronomic information, as much as that's super important. Like, you've got to add that data to it. And then you go forward, right? Taking the plants forward, understanding, like, what are we doing to the crop and how is it affecting them? Ooh, outdoor is one thing. Being able to understand, like, where your plants are, if the storms are coming, that's a big. But, like, if you're inside in any form or fashion, greenhouse, if it will, you have control and the ability to, like, understand the cause and effect with real numbers. Like, you are not sending stuff out in a way that, like, man, oh man, there are some rock stars, and steering their cultivations that are still blind in the world to, like, what is that all doing? And I'm eager. Please come find me, because we are totally eager to help you learn more. But then last but not least, it really is about making sure you hit it, like timing that harvest so that you've got as much as what you want and you don't hit that red line, and getting better all the time. So that's what LightLab helps folks to do. And so let's talk about, like, I was going to talk about, like, kind of how you do that, because a lot of people are usually curious about, you say it's easy. It is easy. But let's talk about what it is. First, you gather sample, right? And so what that usually means for us is we gather some plants, we gather some buds. You'll grind those buds up in the grinder that comes with the system. You will put the amount that LightLab tells you to put into the vial. For hemp compliance tests, it's about a gram of sample. For an adult use plant test, it's about 1/3 of a gram of sample. And then LightLab will tell you to do the next step, which is extraction chemistry. So it's going to say, okay, Scott, you added 1/3 of a gram of your beautiful cannabis into that vial. Now add 30 milliliters of solvent. You're going to pull those out of LightLab. I'm going to show you the pictures of this deal here coming up. And then you're going to strap that onto a shaker where LightLab it'll be doing its own thing while the shaker is doing extraction chemistry. It's pulling all the cannabinoids out of there. And then you inject it into LightLab and it does its chromatography thing from that point forward. Every sample preparation will kind of get a new vial and syringe, but other than that, LightLab is on its way. So this is what it looks like when you hit the screens, right? The first thing a user would do, they say, okay, what do I want to test today? I want to test a plant sample today. Thank you very much. So they push plant. And then the next thing you'd see is it a THC dominant or a CBD dominant plant? You'd follow through the steps. Every one of these workflows is very different based on what you want to test. And it walks you through how you should prepare that sample. Again, based on what you want to test, they're all very, very different. But it would look something like this if you're testing a hemp sample. I know that painted lady is a lot prettier than this. Do not get me wrong. This is not Davis Farms hemp. I promise. This, however, is what it would look like going into the vial or into the grinder and then into the vial on the scale. And then we pull some solvent out of the system and we didn't inject that solvent right into the vial. And that, again, that's about 30 mils of solvent usually. That solvent it's a methanol-based solvent. It comes in a consumables kit that we sell to you along with LightLab. It comes to about $4 a test, like I said earlier. And that includes all the stuff you need, including that super important column. But everything goes into the vial. It goes onto the shaker. Sorry, I skipped the shaker. The shaker does a little buzzy thing where all the cannabinoids pull out. LightLab times that part of it too. Again, super dummy proof. Gets injected into the system through a filter. You forget the filter, you haven't broken LightLab forever. There's a way to fix it. But it goes through the filter, and from there forward, LightLab's doing its thing. And you are hopefully doing your thing. You are going and dealing with some plants, right? Because this is how it really should be. It should be incorporated into your bigger systems. Because LightLab at that point will just time it, right? You got an 8-minute window after that to wait. 8 minutes, not 8 days, not sending stuff to this guy to package it up, to go to this thing, 8 minutes, and you're waiting on your results. And then you get that. And this is what comes on the screen. And then you get all our support basically from the edges. And that's what we do around all of the different applications that LightLabs get used for. And that's extraction and kitchens and all sorts of stuff. But we want you to understand crop variants. We want you to understand how to maximize those efforts that you're putting into your breeding program. And all this talking I do, we capture that, and we've got a great team to support it too. So this is super important to us to help you fact check your grower's intuition, keep that lab on point, but grow with data. That's it. Grow your plants, but grow with it. There is so much data to be had, folks, and this little 13-pound box is a miracle for it, I gotta say. We also let you see the data on your phone. So if you scan that little QR code that you saw in some of those results, that will bring you to just a web-based capability that lets you walk away. So you're walking your field. When I said go walk your field, please go walk your field. Take your phone with you, and then you can go, oh, LightLab's got 4 minutes left. And then when it's done, you'll see all these results on this. That's an awesome feature. Our engineers are awesome. We got more stuff coming. You also get our certificate of analysis at the end. And that's super important, right? Going back to the beginning, it's all about that number and rolling it up. So you get all these numbers and the chromatography. This traceability is exceptionally important for future readiness. And you better believe we're doing a lot with the standards bodies. So I want to talk with you a little bit about that too, about where we fit in with standards bodies and data and things like that, because that's the big question, right? It's kind of all right, how do these things get measured? How do you fit in? What's your accuracy to all these things? And it's crazy because it is a wild, wild west. You touched on it a tiny little bit. What's the USDA testing situation? What's the Farm Bill say? What do the states do? Changes every single day. Here we go. But this is what it really comes down. 2018 Farm Bill, it gave us very definitive language around what hemp is. And it really came down to finding hemp around an amount of E9 that was in it. Delta 9, that's all it said. Dry weight Delta 9 has to be below 0.3%. And we know the holes that created. Whether you love to leap through those holes or you go around those holes, we won't get into that business. But from D8 to THCA flower, it creates lots of holes. Because the USDA, which is also governed by the 2018 Farm Bill, the same language in the 2018 Farm Bill says that the state bodies or tribal bodies or any laboratory body that wants to get involved in hemp testing has to use methods that say total THC is calculated. And that total THC has to use decarboxylation or some similar method so that you're pulling everything into this calculation that accounts for all the THCA that's in flower. There is so much confusion around this point. Man, state to state, tons of confusion, but this is it. This is the difference. And again, we can move on from there, but just know when LightLab calculates its total THC, it's doing this calculation. Total THC equals 0.877 times the amount of the acid form of THC. That's THCA. That's what the plant grew. When you burn it, you lose the amount that is equivalent to that 0.877 multiplication. You lose a little bit of the weight. So then you add the delta 9, the delta 9 amount, that gets you to your total THC. How accurate is it though, right? Laboratories, orange box, 13-pounder. Let's get down to it. The detectable limit is 0.05% on THC on LightLab. And the error associated with that is plus or minus 0.05%. We're going to dig in more. I like to talk about real world numbers because I live in the real world. And when we get out there, when you're just talking about a typical plant sample, adult use cannabis sample, and you're just throwing on it with our little tiny crappy scale and you're out on the ground in the field, you're going to get plus or minus 1% with it, the limit of 0.5%. Sample preparation is definitely always going to be the biggest contributor to any error, and that is 100% the same at your laboratory. So let's flip the script on and know that, if you control those errors, then you know the truer numbers for yourself. So that's a really important part of this conversation, right? Let's talk about what some big third-party kind of studies say about like the data. University of Kentucky is the first one I'm going to go to. They do kind of an annual study. They send out lots of hemp samples. Everybody tests them and sends results back. In 2020, it was 78 labs and us and Orange Photonics. When you look at that data, and I always bring this to attention because people think like, how does this really work? You look at trueness and you look at repeatability, and really those are like important, and we'll talk about what they really mean. We were equivalent to a high quality laboratory result. And really what gets down to it is like, if you look at the bell curve, LightLab was within 0.01% of the total THC of the test average on that bell curve, which is really important because the test spread of all those 78 laboratories, you had something like an 8% spread in data, right? So you get this huge variation in data. LightLab hits the middle, ping, ping, ping all the time. It performed better than 50%, 50 of the 78 laboratories. These are state certified laboratories you'd send your stuff to. LightLab performed better than them. When we fast forward to last year, NIST, so that's the National Institute of Standards, they did a pretty cool study, like CAP. I want to say CAP study. Canna QAP study. They did 3 samples and there were 150 laboratories. And it was a similar kind of thing. Like, give us your data. Tell us what you think about this same exact sample. LightLab in our hemp compliance mode measured within 0.04% or better than the proficiency test average. A lot of words in there. It's really important, right? Again, much, much better than most of those participating laboratories. What is repeatability and reproducibility though? What does that really mean? This is super nerd time, but I think it's so important because it's really like, it's the characteristic that matters more than anything to everybody on this call. Like, damn, if I send the same thing out, is everyone going to tell me the same answer? Or if I send the same thing out over and over to the same people, like, will I get the same results from them? These are like questions that we all have. AOAC is a standard body here in the United States, right? Just like the USP and others, it publishes method requirements. So we kind of looked at their method requirements around HPLC and a big data set that we had from LightLab. And here's the data on those method requirements and things like that if you want to chase them down. And we wanted to look at what repeatability is. So that's like the variation you should expect. If you take the same sample and you test it over and over again, how much should it differ? Reproducibility is if you send the same sample to different labs or different light labs, how different should they be? Like, what's the variation there? That's the difference between repeatability and reproducibility. And we were curious, so we started to kind of look at this. And what we did is we did 4 blinded light labs, 4 samples of flower and 4 samples of concentrate, all random, all blinded, all split, right? And this is the results. And this is a huge data set here. And you can get the full thing from me if you want a big paper. But when you're looking at just this 20% flour, right? I want you to look at that 20% flour on LightLab, you should expect repeatability. That means if you tested it over and over, to be between 19.3% and 20.7%. Reproducibility, meaning if you tested that same sample on different light labs, will be between 19.1% and 20.9%. You're going to have one weird outlier. That's a math thing that I count for. But that's the number. And look down to hemp compliance. That number gets super awesome for the hemp compliance mode, right? Like I'm very proud of what we can do here on this little orange box. Especially when you start looking at what the AOAC standards are. And this is the standards that your laboratory has to live with. This is what they got to pull. You see the plant standards there, guys? 3 and 5%. That's the spread that's allowable. And so when you see that spread, sorry, they're like, well, yeah, that's the standard. Good luck. And we just don't think that that's really something that you, as whether you're farming for compliant genetics in the hemp realm or growing adult use cannabis or making extracts or edibles, that's not livable data to run a business with. And that's really where we shine. We're proud of that. Those numbers are super tight, right? Like I said, like you get really, really tight. This is the last point that I'm really going to nerd out with you guys on. And it's the one that I had to kind of dig into because we all know there has just been so much noise and plenty of it in the right places around lab inflation, potency inflation in the adult use cannabis market across the United States. There are plenty of people that are doing good work around that. We stand for agnostic truth. So we see a lot of numbers that don't match. That's for damn sure. That said, I was really curious when Jeremy and I started talking, if the problem was systemic to type 2 and type 3 plants. I knew it was a problem with type 1 plants. So I started poking and found this awesome paper from Zarab Jacome. So go check it out. 2018 paper, check it out. This is a lot of data, but basically what they did is they looked at a whole lot of labs. The 6 largest producing or largest labs across the state of Washington in 2018, tons of data, right? And they looked, if you look at the top, that's type 1 plant data. In the middle is type 2 and 3 plant data. And the middle is, or the bottom is concentrate data. Tons of crazy data. Let's just look at what we care about here, which is summarized. They summarized it as type 2 and 3 plant data, right? So this is kind of a picture of reproducibility and repeatability from the labs when looking at type 2 and type 3 flower. Okay. First, the thing on the left there, that cool, like weird, call that an umbrella plot. That's really the spread of CBD in the results from each lab. So if you look at like lab A, the average there was 9%, lab F, the average there is 12%, right? If you look at the thing on the lab on the right, that's called an effect size matrix, super statistical, weird, crazy thing, right? It really tells us more about reproducibility and repeatability, though. It uses something called common language effect size. Do not get caught up in that. Look at the crazy patchwork colors, right? And really what I want you to look at here, what this means is that when you're comparing different labs, and let's look at the bottom left corner, lab A to lab F. You see that there? If you were a farmer in the state of Washington and you sent the same exact sample from your crop to lab A versus lab F in Washington, the likelihood that lab A would give you a higher result than lab F is 82%. And so all the colors of that chart show us the differences in how unsimilar the lab results would be on a type 2 or type 3 flower on this one study in the state of Washington in 2018. In a perfect world, in a harmonized system as it should be, this is a white chart. It's really telling because these density plots already also like indicate what the findings found was that there is a huge propensity like to misdisplay or not be able to accurately quantify low levels of CBD. And the low level maxima of 0.1%, like that is a 0.1% LOQ that is reported over and over for most cannabinoids in laboratories, period. That 0.1% does not get it done for the needs of this hemp market because you have those errors. So then you also have what they found in here was like a very systematic tendency for certain labs to report higher levels than others. And that's what you see kind of across this weird umbrella plot. So, it's a patchwork, and it really says something just in the state of Washington, but definitely otherwise too, about kind of the challenge that hemp farmers, man, you guys have when you're trying to grow awesome genetics, but don't go hot, man.
That's powerful stuff, Jill.
Yeah, it's I love digging in. This was it was for me a learning opportunity as well, and I thank you for that. And I thank you a lot for the opportunity to come and talk with you guys today, because every time we share, we learn, right? We get to grow together, and we are at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to science being applied in this industry. And I'm eager for collaborations like this that go way across the lines, right? Like we're a business that deals with all the pots in cannabis, no pun intended. And to work closer with you and Davis Farms and the work that you're doing, it really teaches us a lot. So again, thanks a lot, Jeremy.
Yeah, you bet. No, thank you, Jill. Like I told you, this is a brilliant mind in cannabis, a cannabis warrior to the core. She's absolutely here to help this industry to succeed and be better every day. So we should be really grateful to her for that. And no question about it. The stuff that you just brought up it's profound. It's exactly why we're here. So we get to this point where now we know we need to hold these guys accountable. Hopefully that's the beginning. Hopefully that's a starting point, because we do see some variability, and you're pointing out how glaring it is below 1%, which is where we're all operating. And so I think it's neat to call it out and see how it has impacted hemp farmers. I'd love for all my fellow hemp breeders out there to know that if they're pushing these 0.4s and 0.35s, maybe they better take a look at it. And I'd certainly
call me,
yeah.
please call us. Well, call somebody in your state that's got a LightLab. It's really important.
And I'm sorry, Jill, but on the LightLab, I just want to say this is an incredible tool. If you didn't get it, I mean, this is a portable Pelican case, which we're all familiar with. This is a tough case that you can take out in the field in, pretty extreme environments. You don't need a chemist. It's going to function for you. It's going to give you the results that you need. And I think, Jill, you touched on another really good point from a breeding standpoint. So there's a compliance element to it. But breeding standpoint, ratio testing. We're doing all this ratio testing that's just not realistic for us to do at scale. And this is a great tool to help breeders and to help everybody understand compliance. So now I guess, what do we do? How do we help these labs to recognize?
It's so hard. Yeah, it's so hard because it can't be war. It can't be war. No. It starts with like truth. That's what I always say. Like, starts with truth. Listen, I walk into extraction labs sometimes if you want to put their fists up at. So I'm like, I can show you how to improve your yields. And they go, I know what I'm doing here. Same with, legacy folks that have been growing their plants for years and years. Like, sometimes data can be a threat. But if you have patience and enough data, it's kind of undeniable. And that's what I think we've got to do, is we've got to start to really do more studies like this, like the awesome one from Washington, and understand like the implication of not having better harmonization in the system for, the industry, for patients. Because that's what it really comes down to, is like patients and consumers should be able to expect the same thing. And then it trickles all the way up to be able to allow businesses to like make money. But right now it's a complete cluster. And until we have better harmonization in the standards and the way that laboratories get the most important number. Like, damn, not everybody's going to have the same NMR, right? Like that's hard. It's hard. They're just, those tools are already in place, but there is real moment here for like harmonization in systems. And we work really hard too at the top end. Of course, I mentioned the OAC, but the USP and different standards bodies, we're doing our very best to make it so that hemp farmers of the world don't ever have to send samples to the lab. Well, there's a way that this can be used and tied into the bigger picture so that you're freed kind of from that loop. But that's a long game, but
so two sides of it. Yeah, we see standardization coming and harmonization coming. You mentioned USP, but will it ever take away the value of portable HPLC? Absolutely not. And is the portable HPLC extremely valuable right now to the farmer while we're in this nascent period of the industry? No question about it. So it's really good that you're on here with us today talking about this tool. I've been aware of it for some time. It boggles my mind as a breeder. And, I've, as a legacy farmer, of course, I've been here since before we could really access HPLC or GC analytics whatsoever. So I've watched and been thirsty for this knowledge as it started to come online. So to see this evolution at a point when I started out kind of feeling like, wow, what an opportunity to see these numbers and to understand what's here and what's not here. And then as we've gotten further into it, recognizing the limited capabilities of these labs and how they can actually mislead us in some cases if we're not careful, and in realizing how to tighten up the program. So I hope that we get to a place where, again, everybody can, have some standardization, harmonization in breeding and be able to use these tools unilaterally. But for right now, I'd say this LightLab is an incredible utility to have as a farmer or a breeder.
Yeah, you guys' efforts back then to create some harmonization for yourself by doing these cross lab tests and sending multiple split samples out. Nobody does that. Maybe some folks do that. I shouldn't say that nobody does that, but that's a real effort to wash out what we know is there. And we all kind of hope for guidance. We hope that these numbers will lead us in the right direction, but until you are really confident that the error that is always innately there, and it's not always the fault of someone pushing their finger on the scale. I want to make that clear. That's not what this is about. Like, we're trying to make things go wrong. Errors add up in the wrong direction a lot of the time.
Sure.
You can't get to a place where people operate it's really clearly.
Yes, that's a very good point. And we need to get to a place where they're operating clearly. At least until we see everything change with THC. Once THC changes and we see some global legalization platform, everybody will soften up. But for the time being, I think these things are critical. Compliance is critical. Compliance has been the foundation and building blocks of our business. And so, yeah, again, I think we need to get there. Well, that being said, we're 6 minutes over here, which is typical. I think when we come on, sometimes we'll run 30 minutes over, but we do have a responsibility because we have some cool stuff to do. And, I guess we're going to get to a giveaway here. And, OP has been, and Jill have been gracious enough to offer a 25% discount and as a giveaway here on the
Which
event.
It's a never been before done thing. This is a special for this relationship with Davis Farms. I will say that we have never once given away a discount like this. So I hope somebody that really, really deserves it wins it.
We're grateful for it. We're grateful for it for sure that you guys would come on and do that. And I know there's people here who will benefit from it as well. And we need to get that box out there in the field more. Everywhere that we can have a box like that, it's just a benefit. So happy that you guys are doing that. Thank you. And we're going to give away 2 prizes today. We're going to give away 25% discount off any purchase. And then we are going to give away 1,000 seeds. So I think Scott is here as our moderator, and I believe he has the random number generator with everybody's name by it. And he's going to tell us who has won these prizes. Let's start with that 25% discount, Scott. Well, who gets the 25% discount today?
For the Davis Farms purchase?
Yes, I'm sorry. The Davis Farms 25% discount. We'll give the big one away last, the big OP prize.
Okay. Our first winner is Brandon Black.
Okay, Brandon.
I believe Brandon is located in Florida.
Okay, Brandon, well, you just won 25% off of any Davis Farms purchase this season. So hopefully you can put that to use. Yes,
Yep.
yes, yes. Okay,
Congrats.
let's talk about that 1,000 seeds. Who's getting that 1,000 seeds?
1,000 seed winner, Mike Halsema.
Okay, Mike. I think Mike's Hoosier Hemp from Indiana, isn't that right?
Yes.
Yep.
Halsema,
Congratulations.
Indiana. Congrats.
Yep. Okay, we'll get right through this. Who's gonna get that 25% discount on that LightLab?
Yay.
That's no joke, you guys. That's healthy discount.
And,
Yeah, currently that's worth probably about $4,000 to $5,000.
quite the giveaway. The lucky winner for that is Eric Puff. Eric Puff.
All right.
Congratulations, Eric. Definitely hope to work with you in the future.
Okay. So we have all of your email information. We'll get an email out to all of you guys starting the dialogue. We'll get you connected with Jill and OP so that you can execute on that opportunity there. And yeah, what a cool deal. Thank you guys for sticking around today and being a part of this. This has been a fun event. And I guess I'd give the floor to and thank you, Nylia. Thank you, everybody. Mason, everybody.
I
for
see
coming
some
out.
questions too here, guys. If anybody
Ye-
wants me to answer some of those questions, I'm happy to. You know,
Feel
I'll
free.
get
I was going
nerdy
to
all
give you
day
the
long,
floor.
Yeah.
I was going to give you the floor one last moment here, Jill. And I was going to give you an opportunity too. If you have any events coming up where these people might be able to find you, or certainly give me your
for
website
sure.
information.
Thank you. Good
Yeah, of
call.
course.
Good call. Yeah, you know, I never stop moving. We just got done with NECAN here in Boston, and we are headed next. Some awesome events out in New York. We should be walking the floor at Lucky Leaf, New York. We'll also be at MJ Unpacked if you're part of that part of the business in New York. And then heading down to Oklahoma for the end of the month here in March as well. I'm very excited to be at NECAN, Oklahoma, doing an awesome talk down there. But if you ever need to talk with anybody about LightLab across the United States, man, I could show you a map that's just scattered. Please reach out because we'll put you in contact with our community and they'll talk with you directly, show you their box. It's awesome. It's very easy and we'd be happy to spread the love that way. Answering a couple of those questions, easy peasy. Yes, we can definitely test topicals and salves for 19 different cannabinoids, acidic forms. It's a really, really simple workflow. You would use our LightLab high sensitivity to do that with most normal topical and salve formulations, unless it's like a really super high dose. You're going to want our high sensitivity model. And that's just a LightLab that looks just like this, that is even more sensitive than the one I've been telling you about on the talk all day here today. I see an awesome question from Vic as well. You're a patient here in Mass. I'm in Massachusetts as well. You know, this is a question that comes up over and over, like 35% THC, right? And it's a curious question because again, the data would show that the vast majority, the data shows that no, you actually should not believe the 35% THC that's on that label. Now, that said, have I personally tested samples that I know were tested on LightLab, multiple LightLabs, and in multiple laboratories that came up above 35% cannabinoid? Yes, 100%. I have definitely myself tested samples that had, you know, upwards of 36% THC.
There it is. There it is.
Yeah. I love to drop some names here and send you to the greatest places down in Wareham, and that you can find that flower. That said, if you're talking about, you know, you see that label and it says 101.2% total cannabinoids. That's what we're talking about, stacked errors, right? We are talking about the fact that you're looking at usually in that case too, when you see those stacked errors, you're usually seeing the use of GC because they've done derivatization. And so you're usually seeing numbers that definitely add up to over 100%. Or you're seeing weight errors, right? That's what happens too. Like if more goes in there than should be in the first place, it could turn out to be total cannabinoid values that are more than 100% of what should be in there. So you should definitely always beware. I encourage everyone to pull up that C of A. If the C of A looks weird, bring that sample back, question it. It's your right as a consumer to understand what you're buying in the marketplace today. And, you know, again, I encourage you to press back and ask for as much data as you possibly can get access to around products that you consume.
Yeah, question data for sure if it doesn't seem like it falls within the lines of what's realistic. But I'm going to say that I happened to witness that 35% flower test, and it is legit. I've seen they did 3 tests on it. LightLab had done multiple tests on it, and so that's absolutely valid. I'd say that I'm the most skeptical too. Probably, 99 times out of 100, I'd tell you that's not likely to be the case. But yeah, absolutely. And I'll just drop it. That was Trade Routes, just so you know. So there's a little shout out to those guys.
Go Trade Routes. And if you're a medical patient, we'd always love to have a conversation around, the ECS system, the cannabinoids. That's a webinar for another day, but it's not going to be about total cannabinoids. That is usually going to be the most effective medicine for you.
That's what we're about. I think you guys know that. We're the ones with the high efficacy flower for sure. Certainly looking at the compound rich, terpene rich flower. Well, absolutely, Jill. Love it. Do you have any other questions that you want to answer outside of VIX?
No, I'm going to share the webinar or the link to our website here. I see folks asking for that. You can hit us up there. There is a store there. There's lots of information on, what we're doing next. Again, you can hit me up directly. My email is Jill or J Carreiro at orangephotonics.com. I shared it at the beginning of the chat here today.
Everybody who got an email invite to the webinar, if you look in there, her LinkedIn is right there. There's a click link to it. You can click right to her LinkedIn and find her right there. Orange Photonics click links are right there on the previous emails and the email we sent you guys all this morning. So you should have access. We're davishempfarms.com, www.davishempfarms.com. So if you want quality seed, you know where to go. I hope to be providing a number of you with seed this year for your grows. It's going to be a good year to grow, and we're going to be right there with you, high touch, helping you all the way through it. From my end, I want to let you know that we will be at NOCO this year. So anybody who's attending NOCO, we'll be doing a nice giveaway at NOCO as well. And we're going to have some beautiful discounts on seed at NOCO. So we're hoping to see you guys there. Just happy that everybody was in attendance. So grateful to Jill for coming and enlightening us all today. She blows my mind every time I talk to her. And again, today, even though I had seen a little bit of this, it still boggles my mind to watch what these guys are doing and how they're really out there to give farmers a utility to kind of help them to be better at what they do. So thank you very much, Jill. Appreciate you guys a lot.
Totally my pleasure. Totally my pleasure. Fat nugs, everybody. Peace to you all.
See
Thank you very much
NOCO,
for coming.
Jane. Yep. All right.
Hey, Jane. See you at NOCO. Peace out.